What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Bush coming at you solo today, rolling out the first part of a four-part video series. If you guys have purchased the draft guide already, you'll know that this was already released to you guys that did purchase the draft guide, but we've decided to release these for free on YouTube leading up to the NFL draft. The draft's about 2 weeks away. Starting this Thursday, you can see at the bottom of the screen, the draft guide will be 50% off because we're releasing some things like this. So what we're going to be doing today basically is we're going to be going over the quarterback position, what I look for when I evaluate the quarterback position. And if I say anything in this video, this was recorded like late February, early March. If I say anything like the Panthers are a good landing spot for quarterbacks, just ignore that. That was before the Sam Darnold trade, and anything before the San Francisco 49ers traded up as well. But nonetheless, this is more of a process video. So if you do enjoy this video, please like it. Takes 2 seconds and it helps us out. Comment any of your thoughts down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Now let's roll the video. The anatomy of a top 12 quarterback. What we're going to do is we're going to go through and talk about position by position. The reason it's not going to be as in-depth for the quarterback position as it is for the other positions is the quarterback position is the hardest to evaluate. There's guys in the industry, Mel Kiper, Daniel Jeremiah, all these guys been in the industry for so long, and they still can't get quarterback evaluations as correct as they would for other positions. There's a reason for that. One, it's the hardest position in sports. Two, it's the most dependent on situation and landing spot and coaching staff and front office and receiving talent around you and protection. It's just such a complex position that there's no one way to evaluate it. There's no stat that tells us that this quarterback, because he has a high breakout age for receivers, for example, is likely to be successful at the next level. There's a number of different factors. Jax Falcone, Dino Game Theory on Twitter, he talked about the anatomy of a top-tier fantasy quarterback and basically went through a thread and broke down each of these points individually. But for a quick overview, just in general, these are kind of a general rule of quarterbacks that if you want to kind of keep that in mind. All those benchmarks that he lists are just ideal qualifications. Of course, there's exceptions to every rule, and probably nobody in the NFL, including Patrick Mahomes, fits all of these criteria. So if a quarterback that you like in the draft doesn't fit one of these things, it's not a big deal. But first-round draft capital is important. 6'2", 220 plus. You want a good size quarterback. Yards per attempt, 8 to 8.5 or more is better. That's indicative usually of a productive college quarterback. Completion percentage, 63 plus. An accurate quarterback. You want a lot of passing experience, 750 plus career attempts, 3,535 plus touchdown season. Again, just production in general is always a good thing. Same goes for rushing production, 400 plus rushing yard seasons, very helpful. And then a low interception ratio usually is indicative of a quarterback making good decisions, which is usually the downfall of a lot of young quarterbacks in the NFL. And then a college QBR over 75 to 80 is usually also good. So again, these are all benchmarks. None of them are really set in stone. We'll go more in depth with them for the other positions because they are a lot more predictive than they are for quarterbacks. Every rule has exceptions, as I mentioned. These are good general baselines, though, to establish as you check some boxes in your own kind of evaluation. If you're going through and you're sizing up Trevor Lawrence, and you're like, okay, so he's this tall, he's this heavy, he has this high of production, blah, 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 that you just go through and you're able to check the boxes, and it makes things a lot easier. If you're going to focus on any of them, I would encourage you to focus on yards per attempt, completion percentage, career passing attempts, and rushing production as the most important metrics. But again, none of these metrics have really proven to be very predictive for the quarterback position because it's such a hard position to evaluate in general. Okay, so we're going to get into the first sort of area that we're going to be evaluating for every position, but for the quarterbacks in this video. Pre-draft. What do we want to be doing pre-draft? So pre-draft is right now. If you're watching this video, it means that you have our draft guide, and it's past March 1st, obviously. So this is the pre-draft process. This is the process where everyone is going through, watching these players, sizing up their analytical profiles and talking about where they're going to get drafted and who's a good fit for them and all that kind of stuff. So this is the pre-draft process. As with every portion of pre-draft evaluation, there are two components, film and analytics. Both matter, first of all, despite some of the arguments you're going to see on Twitter. There's a lot of film people versus analytical people argument. I use both. I think smart fantasy players should use both. And they are both very important to the success of evaluating the quarterback position and every position in general. So analytics, the way I look at it is analytics give you a baseline and film gives you context to the numbers. So what I do personally is I look at their analytics first. And the reason I do that is because I want to know going in, if this guy is supposedly elusive according to his analytics, I want to see him be elusive on film, and et cetera, et cetera. Film gives you context. Obviously, you can go into a player that you're watching and see that he has great receiving numbers. And then when you watch him play, he looks kind of stiff in the receiving game, doesn't have great hands, and he doesn't really do much after the catch, but he might have had a high yards per route run because he had like a 30-yard touchdown in the 10 receptions that he caught or something like that. Numbers can be skewed, so that's why film is there to be backing it up. So speaking of film, we're going to get more into film. What traits matter for the quarterback position specifically? Do we want quarterbacks with strong arms? Do we want them to be able to throw with anticipation? Reading coverage, is that important? And how can you properly measure these traits using film and analytics? Because some of the things I just mentioned, there's no real number to suggest if they're good throwing with anticipation or good at reading coverage. Let's start with what traits do matter. And the answer is the ones that we can actually quantify. The truth is, as mere fantasy players and not actual NFL scouts, as you guys have heard me say numerous times, on any given play, we don't have access to certain information. Anybody can go on Twitter and break down film, quote unquote, but you don't know the play call. You don't know what the coach is asking them to do. You don't know what the progressions were. You don't know what the defense was. I mean, you might have a solid idea what the defense on that play was, but there's a lot of things that we don't know as fantasy players. So unless someone is Daniel Jeremiah, Mel Kiper, Todd McShay, Matt Miller, someone who's plugged in and they have access to certain information that the rest of us don't, I would highly suggest you avoid saying things like he doesn't throw with anticipation, because you really don't know until you have that kind of information, which a lot of those guys do have, as well as they have access to what people around the league are saying. And the NFL scouts probably have even more access to information than the media guys do. So that's an area that I want to just encourage you to stay away from is things that you can't quantify, things that are completely subjective. You can think those things, but using them as a basis for an argument is really just not important, because anybody can think that someone's throwing with anticipation if they kind of frame it in their mind right. So the traits that we can actually quantify both on film and using statistics are these 6 for quarterbacks, in my opinion. There's accuracy, right? Are the throws on target? Are they leading receivers with good ball placement? And then in a second, I'll talk about what metrics you can use to actually quantify these areas, and they will be in our draft guide as well. Arm talent. Do they have a strong enough arm to throw downfield and off platform? Can they make plays outside of structure? You'll know arm talent when you see it. This one's really not one that you can quantify, but you'll know if a guy has arm talent. And again, that means more than just arm strength. They can throw it hard, yes, but they do it from a variety of angles and platforms and off their back foot and all this kind of stuff. That all goes into arm talent. Efficiency. Can they consistently generate offense, first downs, and points? And do they take care of the football? They don't turn the ball over constantly. Being an efficient quarterback is a very umbrella term, but there's definitely metrics that we can use to measure efficiency. Mobility. Can they run the ball? Are they able to run the ball as a weapon, or do they just do it to get out of a jam? Certain quarterbacks are dual threats. Certain quarterbacks are mobile. There's a difference. And then some quarterbacks are immobile, like Phillip Rivers, for example. Deep passing. Can they push the ball downfield efficiently and accurately? And then this is a little different, obviously, than arm talent and accuracy, but specifically focused on deep passing. This is an area that's very indicative of fantasy scoring, is guys who are good deep passers. Under pressure. In the NFL, they probably are facing better competition than they've ever faced in their entire lives, and that includes their pass rushers that they're going to be going up against. So if you're not good under pressure and you get drafted by the San Francisco 49ers and suddenly you have Aaron Donald in your division, you better know how to navigate the pocket, how to step up when you need to, how to escape when you need to, and how to stand in and deliver an accurate pass under pressure. So those are the 6 areas that I look for most when evaluating quarterbacks. And you'll see on the screen right now will be a player card. There's a player cards tab in this draft guide. If you want to see all the player cards that I've done, they will be continually updated as the offseason goes along, the more I watch players. But here's the one I did for Trevor Lawrence. And you can see I actually have 10 traits that I evaluate for quarterbacks, but the 6 fundamental areas that I just talked about are the basis for those 10 traits. So it's a weighted attribute grading system that I use. It's kind of complicated, but the fundamental 6 areas, if you're kind of new to this or you just want a more simple way of doing it, are still the foundation of my evaluation. So these 6 traits, if you can evaluate these, then you'll have a good idea of who a prospect is. Anybody with football knowledge, in my opinion, can evaluate a quarterback on these 6 fundamental areas by simply searching on YouTube. If you're looking for Justin Fields film, for example, you would search Ohio State offense or offensive line versus X, and you'll find a bunch of opponents that are listed. Sometimes there's all 22 on YouTube that you can use for better views. And then, or you can just search for the player directly by searching Justin Fields versus, and then watching game film of that player. One tip I'd like to offer if you're going to do that is to prioritize games against good competition if possible, and especially for prospects who go to big schools with a lot of talent, which applies obviously to Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence in this class and Mac Jones. If they go to a big school with a lot of talent, try and find games from both sides of the spectrum and against really good competition, because I don't really care that Mac Jones threw for 500 yards against Liberty, because his team is way too talented to be struggling against a team of that caliber in any means. So that's kind of the type of thing you want to be looking for. And for both sides of the spectrum, try and find bad games statistically and try and find good games statistically. So I would highly suggest, if you're trying to figure out which games to watch of a player, go to their game logs and look for their best statistical performance against a solid opponent and their worst statistical opponent performance against a solid opponent, and then watch those two games to get the kind of floor and ceiling highlight of that player. And then also I would try and watch at least 3 to 5 games if you have the time to do so on these top 4 dudes, especially top 5 if you include Mac Jones. I would definitely watch these 5 quarterbacks. If you only want to watch 5 quarterbacks, I completely understand that. There's probably no need to watch Kyle Trask or Kellen Mond or anything until the actual draft happens, and then we see they get drafted higher than we maybe initially thought. So analytics, the second portion is to marry the film that you see with the numbers, i.e. if you see on film that a quarterback is very accurate, you see him placing the ball downfield with great ball placement, he's leading his receivers, he looks like a very accurate quarterback, his mechanics look really sound, check his completion percentage, check his adjusted completion percentage, and check his deep passing accuracy. In this draft guide, you can see the databases tab, or the positional databases tab that we have put together for you that are filled with advanced statistics to compare these prospects to each other. And a lot of these advanced statistics that you'll see on the screen right now are not free to access. These are from paid resources that we pulled and personally cultivated for you guys to be able to evaluate these guys yourself. So we're all about education here, and this is a tool that I think is very valuable, and I don't think anybody else does this. So make sure you guys take advantage of that. Even if you just want to check in, you can quickly filter and just see, oh, I wonder who's the best deep passer in this class, and just quickly get an analytical view on that. That's fine too. So for the 6 areas that I mentioned, you can quantify all of them except arm talent, as I mentioned, more of a know it when you see it kind of attribute. But for accuracy, as I just mentioned, adjusted completion percentage and deep ball adjusted completion percentage are probably the 2 best ways to do that. Efficiency, yards per attempt, and QB rating, as I mentioned, are 2 of the more predictive analytics that you can use that should probably be able to determine how efficient a quarterback is, along with their touchdown to interception ratio. Mobility. In the mobility tab, you'll be able to see that there's the times that they scrambled, rushing yards, rushing touchdowns, and rushing yards per attempt. Those are all indicative of how good of a runner they are. Deep passing, using passer rating on deep throws, and this is an advanced thing. Adjusted deep completion percentage and percentage of throws that were deep attempts. So that should give you an idea of how good they are at throwing the ball deep and how often they did it in college. Under pressure, you can use pressured completion percentage, pressured passer rating, and their touchdown to interception ratio under pressure. So all of those attributes are in the databases tab, as I just mentioned. You can go check those out anytime you want. As you're watching these guys, you can pull up their statistics and the databases so that you can kind of be like, oh, I think Trey Lance is very good under pressure. And then you can pull up his stuff and be like, oh, yeah, he is. So all of these statistics can help either confirm your viewings or maybe make you further investigate if something, maybe you thought a quarterback was a great deep passer and his statistics maybe didn't materialize in that area. You can go back and be like, oh, maybe it was just the game that I watched or the 2 games that I watched where he had a bunch of great deep plays, and then maybe go watch a couple more games on that guy just to make sure that you kind of fully understand the prospect. I know not a lot of people have time to do that, but if you do, I highly would suggest watching some film and marrying it with the numbers. So once we have all that, we have all the film, all the analytics backed up, we kind of have a good idea of the player. We're just waiting for April 29th, which is the day of the NFL draft. Post-draft, what happens post-draft? Do these guys stay the same just because Trevor Lawrence is the best quarterback in this class, in my opinion? Do we just automatically say, yep, he's the best quarterback in this class? It doesn't matter what landing spot he goes to. It doesn't matter this, doesn't matter that. I disagree. I think everything I listed above is very important in the process. It's very important, and it keeps us all busy until April 29th. However, the truth, and especially at the quarterback position, the vast majority of this information that you're going to find out when you're watching these players is contextualized once names are called. And what I mean by that is, just like the pre-draft, there are 2 important factors in the post-draft evaluations for a quarterback in fantasy. The first thing is landing spot. And I mentioned why the quarterback position is so difficult to evaluate is because while all the stuff I listed above is important to establish pre-draft identities of the players and how they might fare in the NFL, I believe that of the 4 areas that we're discussing in this video, the number one most important factor for quarterbacks' fantasy success and NFL success is what landing spot they go to in the NFL. Think of the last few draft classes, for example. We have quarterbacks like who have been great for fantasy. We have Lamar Jackson. We have Josh Allen. We have Patrick Mahomes. We have Kyler Murray, Deshaun Watson, Justin Herbert. All these guys have been drafted in the past 4 years, and they've all been great for fantasy in the past few draft classes. In fact, and I tweeted this out a number of weeks ago, quarterbacks drafted since 2017, they were drafted to teams that had a winning record in either of the previous 2 seasons. These are the quarterbacks that made this list: Patrick Mahomes, Deshaun Watson, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and Justin Herbert. I would argue maybe if you want to include Joe Burrow and Kyler Murray, those are the 5 or 6 best quarterbacks that have been in those previous draft classes. And I think what you want to see when you look at a quarterback landing spot is you want to see a competent team around them. You want to see a competent organization, because that's how you cultivate good long-term assets, right? If you think about the Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes, because he's the safest asset in fantasy right now, you think of what they have in Kansas City. They have great weapons around him. They have an offensive play caller that is going to the Hall of Fame someday. They have a front office and an ownership group that have been around a long time, and they've been very successful in the past. So all of those factors contribute to the likelihood that a quarterback is able to hit. And you saw that with a guy like Josh Allen. Josh Allen was not a perfect prospect coming out. He came from a small school. He was a raw prospect, and he needed time to develop. Well, they had in Buffalo a great ownership group, a great GM, and a great coach to be able to develop the player and also surround him with talent to help him develop. So when you're looking at the quarterback landing spot, what you want to see is an entire bird's eye view of the organization. It all matters. Maybe some people don't think it all matters, but I am a firm believer that the best way that you can help a quarterback develop is to build a strong nest around him. And that doesn't just include having good receivers or having a good run game or having a good offensive line. That also includes coaching. It also includes general manager and coach getting along and maybe even being together for a while before they get that quarterback, and also ownership as well. So in my opinion, the quarterback needy teams in this draft that fit this description are Carolina, because they have a great new coaching staff that proved a lot in their rookie season as a coach. They have a great owner who's very aggressive and very willing. They have great weapons around whatever quarterback they decide to draft, and they have a pretty solid offensive line as well. So they're a great landing spot. San Francisco, same thing. Quarterback and GM completely aligned, good ownership, good weapons, good protection. New England, maybe not so much on the weapons side of things, maybe on the field stuff, not as much. But when you look at the long-term view, maybe if you're a rebuilding team, a quarterback that lands here has a great shot at success because Bill Belichick wins games. That's what he does. And if he's going to win games, it's probably going to lead to fantasy scoring at some point once they get some weapons. So those are the 3 best landing spots, in my opinion, for a holistic view of the situation. So, of course, there's some landing spots like Atlanta that have great receivers, but they have a new regime. They have an unproven coaching staff. There's more questions about those teams than I have about Carolina, New England, and San Francisco. So landing spots matter, and I would encourage you to weight landing spot more than actual talent, in my opinion, because if, for example, the list above that I mentioned, those quarterbacks, none of them were sure things. Patrick Mahomes wasn't a sure thing. Josh Allen wasn't a sure thing. Lamar Jackson was definitely not a sure thing. Same goes for Justin Herbert. Those guys were cultivated into the players that they are now because of the landing spot that they landed into. So again, I'm going to hammer this home as much as I can. Landing spot is the most important thing for quarterbacks. The guys that went in these drafts that did not work out, however, Sam Darnold, Dwayne Haskins, Daniel Jones, Drew Lock, Josh Rosen, Baker Mayfield, Mitch Trubisky, Tua Tagovailoa. Not that they're all bust necessarily, although some of them are, but those guys have yet to break into consistent fantasy success, unlike the other guys on that list. So when you're looking at these situations, Sam Darnold, where did he go to? He went to the New York Jets. Where did Dwayne Haskins go to? He went to a Washington football team that had Jay Gruden on his way out the door. Daniel Jones went to Dave Gettleman, who we know isn't very good at anything. Drew Lock went to Denver, who was had just fired their coach, and they were a rebuilding team. Josh Rosen went to Arizona, who had a terrible roster in the wake of Bruce Arians' retirement that year and Carson Palmer's retirement. Baker Mayfield went to the Cleveland Browns. Enough said. Mitch Trubisky went to the Bears, who had John Fox as the head coach, and just not a great situation overall. Tua went to a situation with a great coaching staff, but had no weapons around him, and the jury's still out on him anyway, so I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. But the reason for all these discrepancies that I'm talking about between the guys that worked out, the guys that didn't work out for fantasy purposes, is their landing spot, which is a combination of coaching, offensive talent around the player, and everything I just mentioned. So In the 2018 draft, another example, consensus NFL scouting had Sam Darnold as the best quarterback in that draft. Everybody that I trust thought he was the best quarterback in that draft. He came into that class pre-draft with question marks. That quarterback class had question marks around the inaccurate passer from Wyoming and Josh Allen and the mobile quarterback Heisman Trophy winner from Louisville and Lamar Jackson. Those two guys had the most question marks out of anyone probably, and they went subsequently the latest in the draft and went to the best landing spots. At the time, Darnold was considered to be the prized QB prospect, scam for Sam, but to a slightly lower degree, obviously, than Trevor Lawrence. But unfortunately for Sam Darnold, he landed with the New York Jets and Adam Gase and even Todd Bowles when he was there. It was just not a very good organization in general. And Josh Allen went to a playoff team the previous year, and Lamar went to a perennial contender at Baltimore. So there's a reason that these guys were able to achieve their ceilings, which I believe they've achieved since they've entered the NFL. And a guy like Sam Darnold has not been able to quite yet. Another example is this past year, we saw Tua go to a rebuilding franchise that basically sold off all their pieces the previous year and just mistakenly won too many games because they have a great coaching staff. But the reality is that Tua went to a situation with a beat-up offensive line that was rebuilding, with a situation where you don't really have that many great skill position players aside from Devontae Parker. You were starting a 7th-round pick at running back. It was a situation that was not ideal for a rookie quarterback to be stepping into, on top of the fact that he had a limited offseason and all that stuff. So Justin Herbert, on the other hand, in this very same draft class, vastly outperformed Tua in fantasy, mainly due because of his own ability and his ability to run the ball, but also because of the plethora of weapons that he was gifted in Los Angeles. So again, landing spot matters for every position, but quarterback especially so. Once these top quarterbacks in this draft class are drafted, I will, and I strongly encourage you guys to do the same, really reevaluate their rankings, really dig into their landing spots. And if you don't want to do that, we will do it for you, and you can watch our videos about that and learn something in that regard. Their coaching tendencies, their offensive line, their skill talent, all of that will determine who's going to be the best for fantasy. And more importantly, it's going to determine who's going to be the best for fantasy early in their career too, which is important for a quarterback's development, to get that confidence early. And you can see it with Sam Darnold. He clearly doesn't have the confidence that he had in his rookie season. So I believe this area is so important that I'm willing to make the claim that landing spot can make or break a prospect's career. Imagine if Patrick Mahomes went to Cleveland that year. Imagine if he went to Chicago. Are we still talking about the best quarterback in the NFL? I personally don't think that's the case. Of course, we'll never know for sure, obviously, because he landed in Kansas City and it's a great situation. But the QB landscape could be very different around the NFL if Patrick Mahomes is a Chicago Bear instead of Mitch Trubisky. And again, the way that this applies to this draft class is, even though Trevor Lawrence is the consensus QB1, I will not have it that way if I can clearly see a better outlook for any of the other top 3 quarterbacks, because I don't like what Jacksonville is doing. I've said it on multiple occasions. I don't think they're building a great situation around Trevor Lawrence, and this is historically a losing franchise in general. There's a reason why they have the 1st overall pick. They're a bad team. I think there's a chance that if Zach Wilson goes to the Panthers, for example, or if Trey Lance goes to the 49ers, for example, that I will like them better for fantasy long-term and right away, because I have a feeling that those guys are going to get off to faster starts in their career. And when you talk about a guy who has a great rookie season, I'm sure the statistics dictate that he's more likely to be successful long-term into his career, as opposed to a guy that had a terrible rookie season, which could happen for Trevor Lawrence. So with with the teams that I mentioned, you have to keep in mind stable coaching, long-term contracts, a marriage between GM and coach, and you have the offensive pieces or nest to drop a franchise quarterback into play. In Carolina, you have Curtis Samuel potentially. You have, if he's not a free agent, you have DJ Moore for sure. You have Christian McCaffrey for sure. You have Robbie Anderson. You have a pretty solid offensive line. You have a coach and play caller that are very good. In San Francisco, you have Deebo Samuel, you have George Kittle, you have Brandon Ayuk. You have an offensive line and great play caller there as well. So needless to say, if any of the top 4 quarterbacks land here in San Francisco or in Carolina or in New England, as I mentioned, just because they're so successful all the time, they will be my QB1, because these guys are all tremendously talented and they have similar fantasy ceilings, in my opinion. And the thing that will actually determine whether they hit their ceiling or whether they hit their floor will be their environments. I guess I fall under the camp of nature versus nurture. I fall under nurture, because I think that is the important part of fantasy quarterback success. So the last thing that we're going to talk about before we get out of here and before you guys can go explore some of the other features of this draft guide is draft capital. Here's a list of the 20 quarterbacks who have finished in the top 12 in points per game over the past 3 seasons. As you can see the list on the screen right now. In terms of draft capital, 15 guys were 1st-round picks out of the 20. So It's very important that for this draft class specifically, you probably only want to be focused on the top 4 guys and Mac Jones, because those are the guys that are going to get the draft capital. In fact, 11 of the 20 were top 10 picks, and 8 of them were top 3 picks in the NFL draft. And the only guys that were exceptions to this rule were Russell Wilson, Drew Brees, Kirk Cousins, Dak Prescott, and Tom Brady. And a lot of those guys are outliers in their own right, especially Drew Brees and Tom Brady, just based on what they've been able to do for their entire career. So stating the obvious, we prefer first-round quarterbacks. For Mac Jones in particular, wherever he gets drafted is going to drastically improve his potential for fantasy success. If the rumors are true and Mac Jones' floor is 8 at Carolina and he goes in the top 10 picks, I'm going to have a very different outlook on him than I do right now, where I think he's more so a back end of the first, early second, mid-second round type of quarterback. If he goes that high and the NFL is indeed that high on him, I'm going to move him up in my rankings. I hope you guys all enjoyed this breakdown. I really went in depth with this, as you could probably tell. When I'm looking at quarterbacks, these are the things that matter to me most. I encourage you to leave any of your comments on the site. This probably will be up live on YouTube eventually before the draft goes live. So if you're watching this on YouTube, I encourage you to go check out the draft guide if you haven't already done so. There's still plenty of other awesome benefits in there. And you guys can adopt some of the ways I evaluate and watch these guys for yourself. So you don't have to listen to me. If you think my process is sound, but maybe you disagree that I shouldn't like Zach Wilson over Justin Fields, then adopt the process for yourself and go do the evaluation. I'm more than happy to have a spirited discussion about that. Make sure you check out the other videos in this series relating to the other positions, and also check out the databases of the stats of the 4 positions as well. Thanks a lot, guys, and peace out.